A frozen tear cracked against her cheek the moment the train began to slow, and Abigail Mercer didn't wipe it away because the Montana cold had already claimed it, turned it hard like everything else in her life had become. Outside that frost-covered window, the world spread white and endless, so quiet it felt like the land itself was holding its breath, waiting to see if she'd survive what came next. She sat alone in that nearly empty carriage, clutching a small metal tin that burned cold through her gloves, and inside it was all she had left of being loved without conditions, a locket with her mother's picture and a single curl of auburn hair. 23 days of travel, 3 different trains, and more doubt than she could ever speak out loud had brought her here to the edge of everything she'd ever known, and she couldn't tell which terrified her more, the ending or the beginning. The conductor's voice echoed through the car announcing Willow Creek Station, and it struck Abigail straight in the chest because somewhere beyond that lonely platform waited Samuel Blackwood, a widower with 3 children and a ranch in Montana Territory, a man who'd placed an advertisement that had carried her across the entire country. He could take one look at her careful city posture and her Boston coat and decide she wasn't worth the trouble, and then what? She had a secret folded inside her Bible, a doctor's paper that explained why a woman of 28 had never been married, why she never would bear a child, why the word barren followed her like a shadow she couldn't outrun. When the conductor asked if she was sure this was her stop, she lifted her chin and said she was expected, and she didn't mention the careful letters written by lamplight or the fear that had been eating her alive since she'd sealed that first envelope. The train shuddered to a stop and Abigail stepped down into air so cold it stole her breath clean away, wind cutting through her coat like it was made of paper instead of wool. One lamp burned on that desolate platform even though it was daytime, and there he stood, tall and broad-shouldered in a heavy sheepskin coat, hat pulled low over copper hair touched with gray at the temples. When Samuel Blackwood stepped forward and removed his hat, his blue eyes were sharp and steady, not cruel but not kind either, just measuring her the way a man judges land or livestock he's thinking about purchasing. His handshake was brief and firm, his voice deep and calm when he said her name, and when he told her Montana was hard land that stayed fair only if you respected it, Abigail couldn't tell if it was a greeting or a warning she should have heeded before stepping off the train. The wagon ride to the ranch passed in careful conversation that felt like walking on ice that might crack any second beneath their feet. Samuel asked if her journey had been acceptable, and she said yes because what else could she say, that she'd spent 3 weeks wondering if she was making the biggest mistake of her life? Then she asked about his children because she needed to hold on to her reason for coming, and something crossed his face that might have been pride or worry when he told her about Emma, just 4 years old and talking nonstop about having a mother again since the letter had arrived. Charlie was 8 and stubborn as his late mother, and fighting a chest cold that worried Samuel more than he wanted to admit, and Olivia was 10 and missing her mama so badly she might never warm to a stranger trying to take that irreplaceable place. The weight of Abigail's secret pressed heavy in her chest because she hadn't told him, not to deceive him, but because she feared every door would slam shut before she could step inside. The ranch came into view as they crested a rise, and Abigail whispered that it was beautiful, this 2-story farmhouse standing firm against the valley with smoke curling from the chimney and fences cutting lines through endless snow. Samuel corrected her immediately, said it was hard, especially on women not born to it, and those words landed like stones in her stomach because she knew he was right, knew she was soft where this life demanded steel. Then the front door flew open and a little girl burst out like wildfire, boots slipping on ice, curls flying everywhere, shouting about whether Papa had brought their new mama home. Samuel's entire face changed so fast it startled Abigail, that hard line softening into something tender when he said quietly that the whirlwind racing toward them was Emma, and before the wagon fully stopped, Small mittened hands were reaching up, and a bright hopeful voice was asking if she was Miss Abby, and if she knew stories, because all mamas know stories. Abigail's throat closed tight, because the hope shining in that small face almost broke her right there in the yard, and her thoughts were screaming that these children needed someone whole, someone who could give them everything, not a woman carrying a secret that made her less than what the world demanded wives should be. But then Emma slipped her hand into Abigail's like it belonged there, like it had always belonged there, and Abigail heard herself say yes in a trembling voice. Yes, she knew many stories. In the doorway stood Olivia, tall and serious beyond her years, and Charlie, thin and pale, watching this stranger with the careful eyes of children who'd learned not to hope too much because hope could hurt worse than grief. The warmth inside wrapped around Abigail like a blanket, the smell of bread and coffee filling the spaces fear had carved out, and she stepped over that threshold making a silent promise that if they allowed it, if they gave her the chance, she would love these 3 children with absolutely everything she had. That night changed everything because Samuel found the letter, the doctor's letter Abigail had hidden, and she watched him read it under the lamplight, while every second felt like standing on a cliff waiting to fall. When he said the word Barren, it fell heavy between them like an accusation, and shame burned her cheeks hot when she admitted she should have told him from the beginning. The silence that filled the kitchen was suffocating, pressing down until Samuel said she could stay through winter because the mountain passes were too dangerous. She could help with the children, and come spring he'd pay her way back east. 3 months, that's all she had, 3 months to prove something she didn't know how to name. But then Charlie's cough echoed through the house, thin and harsh, and when Abigail said carefully that she knew remedies, gentle ones, Samuel hesitated only a moment before nodding once, and that single nod felt like the first door opening just a crack. Later that night Emma appeared at Abigail's door with tears streaming down her small face, whispering that Charlie hurt, and Abigail took her hand without thinking, without calculating, just moving on instinct toward a child in pain. They worked together over Charlie's feverish form, honey and warm water, and herbs from Abigail's carefully packed bundle, Olivia standing guard at the doorway, like a sentinel protecting what remained of her broken family. Samuel watched from the shadows with unreadable eyes, as his son's breathing slowly eased, and when he said thank you quietly, those 2 words carried the weight of a father's desperate relief. That night Emma fell asleep against Abigail's side. Charlie slept easier than he had in weeks. Olivia watched with careful guarded eyes, and outside the snow kept falling, while inside the Blackwood house something fragile and new and terrifying had begun to grow. Morning came pale and quiet, and Abigail rose before the others, moving through the cold kitchen like she was borrowing someone else's life for just a season. She lit the stove and set water to warm, finding strange comfort in small tasks that steadied her shaking hands, cutting bread and moving as if she belonged even though she knew she was only a temporary solution to a permanent problem. When Samuel entered and stopped dead seeing her at his stove, something shifted in his expression before he could hide it, and the days began to settle into a rhythm that felt dangerously close to belonging. Emma practiced letters with fierce concentration. Charlie worked through psalms growing proud when he got them right. Olivia read aloud with a careful, strong voice, and for the first time since arriving, Abigail forgot to count the days remaining until spring would send her away forever. Then Emma's scream shattered everything, and Abigail was running before conscious thought caught up, seeing the child frozen near tall grass with a rattlesnake coiled and buzzing its terrible warning. Samuel's voice cut through commanding Emma not to move, and he charged from the barn with a shovel, one swift strike ending the danger. But when he handed Emma over she clung to Abigail's neck whispering that Miss Abby had come first, came running like lightning. The look Samuel gave Abigail in that moment held something unsettled, something that hadn't been there before, like he was seeing her differently than he had when she'd stepped off that train in her city coat with her careful posture. Life kept moving forward with Abigail teaching mornings and cooking and mending and soothing, the children following her like she was gravity itself, and Samuel watching more than he spoke until the day riders came. 3 men arrived with the lead wearing a fine coat and expensive saddle, his smile never reaching his calculating eyes, and Olivia whispered a single name that made Samuel's jaw tighten: Hargrove. Samuel stepped onto the porch with his rifle near but not raised, and Abigail gathered the children close before stepping outside beside him, standing there like she had every right to defend this family even though technically she was just passing through. Hargrove spoke smooth, poisonous words about land and water rights and the creek and progress, but Abigail smiled politely and offered coffee and spoke of neighbors and children and bread baking on the stove, confusing these men who weren't prepared for calm in the face of their veiled threats. When Emma ran out and wrapped her arms around Abigail's skirts announcing proudly that she was their new mama, Samuel went absolutely still, and he didn't correct her, didn't clarify that Abigail was temporary, and Hargrove's gaze sharpened with interest before he tipped his hat and rode away, leaving threat hanging in the air like smoke. The storm that came later was biblical in its fury, rain falling hard and fast, the creek rising wild and angry, the bridge groaning under pressure they had to cross. They went on foot, boards slick, water roaring beneath them, and then the crack that split the air and Charlie's leg fell through, his scream cutting straight through Abigail's heart. She dropped to her knees working at his boot with shaking hands, while Samuel shouted orders and Olivia screamed, and another crack warned them seconds before Abigail freed Charlie and shoved him forward towards solid ground. The bridge collapsed beneath her and Samuel caught her wrist, pulled with everything he had until they lay together in the mud breathing hard with children sobbing all around them. And later by the fire Samuel said she'd saved his son, but Abigail answered that he'd saved her first, saved her from disappearing into nothing. Spring edged and slow and muddy, bringing with it the reality Abigail had been avoiding. So she bought train tickets she absolutely didn't want, letting fear tell her to leave before loving became something that could destroy her completely. When Olivia found those tickets, her young face went hard with betrayal, asking if Abigail had planned to just disappear. And Samuel saw the paper too, hope dimming in his eyes, like a candle someone had blown out. Before words could settle the damage, trouble arrived in the form of Hargrove filing a forged claim that threatened everything, and they searched the attic by lantern light through dust and old books until Abigail found a hand-drawn map signed and witnessed long ago. At the hearing truth won, and the creek stayed, and Hargrove lashed out only to meet Samuel's fist, hard and final, and on the ride home Samuel asked why she'd bought those tickets in the first place. Abigail spoke her deepest fear out loud for the first time, fear of loving and losing, of never being enough for anyone, of the word barren defining her entire worth to the world. Samuel's response changed everything when he asked, what if he wanted her anyway? What if this family was already whole exactly as it was? And Abigail tore those tickets in half right there while hope rose slow and careful between them, like dawn breaking over mountains. They married 2 weeks later with no grand church or long guest list, just neighbors packed into the farmhouse, while rain pounded the roof and wildflowers woven into Abigail's hair by Olivia's careful, loving hands. When the Reverend called her Mrs. Blackwood, Emma laughed like the world finally made sense, and Charlie stood tall with pride radiating from every inch of his growing frame. Life didn't soften after that because the land doesn't care about love, only about work and respect and survival. Charlie grew stronger under Abigail's care, his cough fading, his shoulders filling out as he followed Samuel everywhere, learning what it meant to belong to this hard, beautiful place. Emma bloomed into confidence, telling everyone in town that her mama had chosen them specifically, sleeping easy now without nightmares stealing her breath. Olivia changed slowest, watching and testing and holding her heart tight until one evening she stood in the doorway asking what she should call this woman who'd become her mother. And when Abigail said whatever feels right, that she wouldn't erase the mama who came before, Olivia swallowed hard and whispered the word mama like a promise she was finally ready to keep. The world had measured Abigail by what she couldn't give and found her wanting, labeled her barren and less than, but 3 children had chosen her as their mother anyway. They taught her that family isn't built in the womb, but in moments of showing up, running toward danger, staying through storms, choosing to love even when fear screams to run. Abigail stopped wearing the locket eventually, placed it on the shelf beside family photos both new and old, because she didn't need proof of past love anymore when she was living inside present love that filled every corner of her days. One evening as the sun dipped low and children ran across the yard with laughter echoing wide and free, Samuel looked at Abigail and said, "They chose you." And she smiled with tears bright in her eyes, answering that they'd taught her how to choose herself. That choice, that radical decision to love and be loved despite what the world said she lacked, that changed absolutely everything.